Good evening. My name is Lois Gaston, and I'm honored to serve as president of Monrovia ChangeMakers. We're so happy to have you join us this evening. I want to let you all know that this meeting is recorded, and you will be muted unless the host unmutes you to speak. I want to make sure that you recognize why we're existing. Monrovia ChangeMakers is an educational association focused on respect, harmony, and cooperation among Monrovians. To honor those who have worked to stop bigotry, prejudice, and segregation, to reveal the effects of victims of intolerance, to encourage positive action against bigotry, and to focus on our own community and have a broader impact. The issues we seek to eliminate from relationships are lack of understanding and looking down on, quote, the other, any group that is different and thus seems to be a threat or an opponent. Bigotry and prejudice are equally wrong, whether experienced because of a difference of skin color, ethnicity, gender, intellectual or physical ability, political or religious belief. Our aim is to promote treatment of people as individuals. So we are extremely proud to have with us tonight who love pets and are here to help us direct our attention to you, the audience, and the world. I'd like you to use the Zoom chat to ask panelists questions or to make comments. I hope many of you have watched the Oscars where Tyler Perry mentioned "do not hate," and that's exactly what we want everyone to focus on. Doesn't matter whether you're Black or brown or Muslim or Asian, transgender or law enforcement, to hate is wrong. Let's stay in the middle and have a truthful conversation without violence. Tonight's objective, to talk about the systemic racism against Asian Americans in the past and present, and hopefully to change that in a positive way ongoing. By raising awareness about the Asian American culture, past and present, perhaps each of us will commit to individually strive to prevent racial violence in the future. Thank you. And now I'd like to present Susie Ling. I am a fan of hers, and I'm sure by the end of this conversation, you will be too.
Hi, everyone. You know, it's kind of sad to see all your names as I'm scrolling through the Zoom, because I really like to give you a high five or give you a pat on the back, etc. But the wonderful thing is we also have some visitors here today that are not, you know, living near us, not our neighbors, but still very much close to our hearts. So thank you, those of you who've come from Hawaii and other places today. This last year, honestly, oh, by the way, my name is Susie Ling. I live in Monrovia. I also teach Asian American Studies at Pasadena City College, which is a local community college 6 miles from my home. I'm one of the very few people on earth who live on Colorado and work on Colorado Boulevard. That's really cool. But this last year, as I'm sure for all of us, has been really, really hard on multiple levels. There have been about 3,800 anti-Asian racist incidents reported in 2020. This doesn't tell the whole story. As we know, race crimes and gender crimes are usually not reported. Most of the reporting have been from women. About 2/3 of the incidences have been attacks on women. And with that, also especially seniors. Since I am a senior woman of Asian descent, I'm hitting all the categories that I don't want to hit. Now, anti-Asian racist incidents include pushing, slashing of the throat, as in Midland, Texas, and murders in Atlanta. This does not include other forms of anti-Asian sentiment, such as graffiti or bullying, microaggressions, hate speech, stereotypes. And the one that bothers me the most, actually, ignoring our existence. As Asian Americans, a lot of times people ask me, what is your nationality? And I must tell you, I'm offended by that question because, gosh, can't I be considered an American yet? Although I'm proud to be an immigrant, I've certainly paid my taxes and contributed vastly to this country. So this racial trauma that we have experienced is part of the continuum of racism. When I saw the video on George Floyd, of course, I thought of Rodney King. And for those of us that know their history even more, we thought of Emmett Till. We thought of the lynchings. It goes back and it goes back. For me, I immediately thought of Vincent Chin and Joseph Ileto. So today, I'm very fortunate to have an incredible panel to tell us both about the Asian American experience, especially in Monrovia, but also outside our little circle. So I'm going to start out with Marvin. Marvin almost needs no introduction. Marvin was born and raised in Monrovia and has his parents are of Japanese American descent. And he was born right after his parents came out of Heart Mountain concentration camp. Go ahead, Marvin.
Thank you, Susie. For those of you, again, my name is Marvin Inouye. It's not that my parents came out of camp. What happened was my father was at Heart Mountain concentration camp, and he was drafted out of the camps and became a member of MIS, which were the military people that were sent to Japan. And he was sent there, and on the way there, the war happened to end. He happened to continue on and become a soldier working under General MacArthur there. But what was unusual, that he's an American citizen, and he met my mom there as an American citizen, who ended up being sent to Japan prior to the war in 1939 by her parents from Little Tokyo in LA, and she was to become more Japanese. And what happened in 39, the war broke out in 41, and she missed the last boat home. And so she ended up spending the war years as an American citizen in Japan. And then after the war, she got a job with the American military because she now could speak Japanese and English fluently. So she worked for the American military. And that's how she came in contact with my father in Sendai, Japan, which is where the earthquake and tsunami took place in 2011. And my dad ended up staying and being a civilian worker in Japan, helping to rebuild Japan till 1950, when he decided to return to America. That's when he came back to the States, but he now had a wife, and my older sister, and I think she's looking in on this, Cheryl, who had been born in Japan, were brought back to America. And initially they were going to live in Los Gatos, where in Northern California, where the San Jose people had been incarcerated to Heart Mountain. However, my mom had a problem with my grandmother Inouye because she had not been approved by the grandmother for marriage, and my dad comes home with not only a wife but also for my grandmother, a grandchild. So that was unusual. And my mom couldn't live with my grandmother, so she came back to the Los Angeles area, and my dad followed her down and kept the family together. And I happened to be born in 1951 at the Japanese hospital in Little Tokyo. And because my dad had been a UC Berkeley graduate in chemistry, he was again looking for a job, and one of his colleagues from UC Berkeley said that, oh, they're looking for chemists and engineers out at Aerojet General in Azusa. So he went out there and he got, I guess I'm considering the time period right after, this short period of time after the war, he was able to land a job with Aerojet General. And I remember seeing one of his pay stubs at $1.90 an hour working at Aerojet General in 1950. And so he needed a place to live for the family. And he ended up choosing Monrovia. And I believe it was because it was in close proximity to Aerojet General, which was located 2 cities away east in Azusa. So that's how we initially ended up being there. But my dad, I remember telling me that he was very fortunate because this home builder had built this home for his own family, but then decided not to live in it. And my dad was able to purchase it from him at a whole $7,000 back in 1950. But little did I know, and I didn't realize how lucky we were. I mean, because most of the people in the area, and again, living in Monrovia, I didn't know anything about the neighborhoods or anything at that time, but I found out later we were in the minority area of the community because the people of color could not live north of, I believe the street was it Walnut?
It's around Olive or Almond. So you were near today's freeway, the 210 freeway on Evergreen. Many of us are familiar with Evergreen. It's how we get on the ramp, right?
Correct.
And you were the first non-white family on that street.
Well, I don't know if we were the first non-white. I know that when you asked me to be a speaker, I was counting up the families, and I think there were roughly 5 total Japanese American families that ended up on that neighborhood. I know that we were one of probably the earlier ones, but there were some other Japanese Americans that had lived in Monrovia before the war. So I know that on the street there were the Kawaguchis, the Fujimotos, the Morishita's. So it was about 5 or 6 families on the block, all the way down. And then what was unusual, I figured out later, is that my next door neighbors were Hispanic, they were Mexican. And I thought about this in my kindergarten class. There was about 5 or 6 Mexican families, and there were a handful of African American families. Okay, and what I didn't realize is that, didn't think about it, but my neighbors, most of them were white. On my west side of the family, we had a mixed couple, African American and Caucasian family immediately to my west side. And eventually, though, I realized that the Caucasian members of the community slowly moved out of the area. And it ended up being more African American and more Hispanic. And to this day, I think it's even more Hispanic. But
this
growing
was
up,
kind of good for you because you actually had a good time in the neighborhood, didn't you, Marvin?
I would say I had a great time growing up. Although my friends were primarily African American and Hispanic in the area, up through elementary school through the 6th grade. Then when we transferred to Clifton Junior High School, which is now the middle school, that's when the other other 6 elementary schools met for the first time. And there was a lot more Caucasians there. And it's the first time they'd seen, those Caucasians got a chance to see African Americans, Mexicans, Americans, and Japanese Americans. And I don't recall at that time any Chinese or Korean Americans at the time, except one. Maybe in junior high school, the Korean family that had 2 girls moved into the neighborhood, into south of Dory Road in Monrovia, which is again areas what I thought at the time was the borderline was Huntington Drive. And later on, I found out that about the Asanos and the Sakatanis all living south. They were north of Huntington Drive, but south of Almond Walnut area, Olive. So growing up and regarding the racism and stuff that took possibly place, again, I was very small. When I was a freshman in high school, I only weighed 75 pounds. I was very short and very small, but I was always picked on in elementary school. And actually, my name, Oka, is a shortened version of a name given to me in the 3rd grade by a Caucasian person named Roy Eggleston. I remember his name. He gave me the name Okashin, and I didn't know that it was a derogatory term. So I let him call me that. And it ended up that it stuck all the way through elementary and middle school. And when I got to high school, this name gets shortened. Instead of Okashin, it just got shortened to Oka. So at that time, again, it could have been a derogatory term that he was calling me, but I didn't know any reference to, for it to be necessarily negative. The negative experiences that I can talk about, though, are I was talking to another member of Monrovia's growing up at Santa Fe Elementary School, and they did a lot of this, pulling at your eyes and making fun of you being Asian. But in what I was very fortunate in growing up that I had such good African American friends because they protected me. If someone started to pick on me, my African American friends would come to my rescue and say, "Don't mess with him." And they were usually as big, if not bigger, than the Caucasian people that were picking on me. Occasionally, I remember having one fight with one of my best friends, John Parker, very well-known family in Monrovia, and but I fought with them, but I made up with them. We were kids. We had fights. But the one thing I can say about growing up in what I call the hood, because eventually the freeway took the whole neighborhood across from me, but I was able to go through the alleys and get to the other side of the block where my friends had relocated, and I hung out with what's called the Fig Street Gang, and we competed with the Cherry Street, Los Angeles Street, and Cypress Street gangs. Right. When we say gangs, they weren't really like the gangs are today, but we were neighborhoods that would play and compete with each other in sports and have different kinds of competitions like soapbox derby competitions type things. So I was very fortunate.
Thank you, Marvin. I wanted to caution you about using the word gangs because the chief is in the house and he knows what he's thinking, right? I'm teasing.
Okay.
So what I think what you're saying is, you know, in this continuum of racism theme that we have, is your ancestors or your parents suffered significant persecution by the American government and by the American system. But on the other hand, they also grew you, you know, and they grew you in a racially integrated community, and friendships were made very important. And despite some of the school segregation we saw in Monrovia, people went on and continued their education, which I think is really important. There were a lot of racial fights in Monrovia High. I think we're all familiar with this, especially in the 1960s and 70s. So I'm going to go to my next panelist and maybe come back to you, Marvin.
No problem.
Because Grace Yoshimoto, our second speaker, had the difficult task of being a counselor and a staff person at Monrovia High, a very multi-ethnic community. Grace and Terry Asano, we want to sort of do a shout out for Terry, were some of the only Asian American staff at the high school. Grace, would you like to share some of your story?
Yes, thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. And I was a counselor at Monrovia for about 34 years and just recently retired. Currently, I'm doing some private counseling and facilitating small groups on grief and loss. I think it was a privilege, totally a privilege to be a counselor at the high school. Just want to do a shout out to the Wildcats, go Wildcats. I appreciate being able to share with you tonight, like with Marvin, the huge rise in the anti-Asian hate right now is so painful for me to watch. A lot of feelings of anxiety and fear come to the surface for me very quickly. The attacks, especially against the elderly Asians, are the most devastating to me, I think. I immediately think of my mother, who's Japanese, and if someone either verbally or physically assaulted her in the way I've seen, I think I would just be totally overcome. As it is, I'm very vigilant when I have her out in public in ways I've never thought I would need to before. And when I've talked to other Asians, they've kind of echoed those similar thoughts. My father, very kind of just like Marvin's father, was sent to the internment camps at Heart Mountain. He first started off in the assembly center right there at Santa Anita Racetrack in Arcadia. And he was there for about 2 months and then got sent to Heart Mountain. Fortunately, it was very difficult there for him because he had lost everything. But like with Marvin's father, the Army needed Japanese translators for the war effort. And so even though they considered him a potential enemy combatant, right? As soon as he took this loyalty oath, they shot him over to the military intelligence service. And then right again, so similar to Marvin's father, he was sent to Japan right at the end of the war to do continuing interpretation during the government, US occupation of the government. So I don't know, maybe my father knew Marvin's father. That would be a trip. But while in Japan, he met my mother in Hiroshima. So my mother she's still alive. She's a hibakusha, which is the Japanese term for atomic bomb survivor. So she was 17 years old when the A bomb exploded over Hiroshima, which was in August 1945. And she does recall a huge bright flash of light, then a loud booming sound. She remembers seeing the mushroom-shaped cloud which came as a result of the firestorm that happened. And then she's written poetry about the Black Rain. So in a matter of days, and then subsequent months, like 140,000 people were killed in Japan, just in Hiroshima, and more later in Nagasaki. And the hard part is there was a 75th anniversary of the bombing last year. And as we were watching Japan TV, and my mom, who's now 42 years old, she's still deeply traumatized for that experience, which I myself believe was a war crime. She doesn't say very much, but she does cry a lot about it. So they came over to the United States to live about 1952, and they were very financially poor. But I think what was worse was the public anger and hatred they encountered while they were here in the very beginning. But what I wanted to share, and I don't know how much this is for other ethnic parents, but the main way they dealt with the trauma was by not speaking of it. There's this Japanese Zen word that I quickly learned. It is gaman. So gaman means enduring the seemingly unbearable with patience and dignity. So I grew up with my identity centered around gaman and just being hardworking, non-complaining, and as quiet as possible. So the focus in this transition for them to survive is that they taught me that assimilation was the most important thing. So English became the main language. Japanese language wasn't that important, even though my mother spoke that. My first name was American. I was named after Grace Kelly, the actress at the time. And even though my parents were raised Buddhist, they sent me to a Christian church because that was the American religion. And then, of course, doing well academically was paramount. So any racial slurs that were directed to them on the street or in the market were to be ignored and never responded to. So as I was learning that, when I came to Monrovia in 1984, I started learning a lot about different cultural differences and ethnic tensions. And I must say, the diversity at Monrovia was a gift to me because I learned so much, especially from the students. When I started, there weren't, again, like you said, Susie, weren't many Asians. Thank goodness for Terry Asano. She was sort of the person who helped navigate my way for me. And I just kind of clung on to her because she was a secretary in the counseling office.
And Terry, as the Monrovia community knows, was the daughter-in-law of a Japanese American family that had a store on Myrtle even before the war. So,
Right.
A word that I learned, Grace, as I move on is, you talk about memory, but I actually learned from my Armenian friend that there's also, she thinks, DNA memory, and that the difficulties and the perseverance that our parents suffered actually is inherited by us and then inherited by our children, as you demonstrated. I'm going to talk about, so the Asian American concept in the United States is a political one, in that we blend all the cultures and all the ethnic identities together. And so I think your parents' story about Gaman is a nice segue into our next story about standing up and with dignity. And that is the story of Esma. Now, as we are going to move towards this very precious clip about Esma Ali, our next speaker, a Monrovia resident, and Chief Sanvictores, as we're preparing for that, I did want to thank the iTeens team, the next generation of Carolyn and Christian, who are helping us today with the technical background. And I also wanted to do a big thanks to Mona Manihar of the ChangeMakers, because she really made this so much easier for all of us. So Christian is now going to show us a very interesting video.
And only on 2, someone calls 911 on a Muslim woman in their neighborhood. Now that woman has a message for the police officers who confronted and questioned her, but it's not the message a lot of people would expect. Our Dave Lopez is live in Monrovia with a story you'll only see on CBS 2. Dave.
And Pat, this is a story with a strange twist. Again, you'll only see on Channel 2, and probably rarely will you see a story with this kind of element in it. Behind me is the police community room of the Monrovia Police Department, where they had what can only be described as a very unusual thank you gathering.
These are the culprits.
For Esma Ali, a Muslim, this was something, she said, she had to do. Thank the Monrovia police officers. Thank them for what?
What made me come here is because when it was all done, they really felt bad. And they empathized with me as if I was their sister.
It was quite a gathering. Nearly 40 people at the Monrovia police station to help Miss Ali say thank you to the police.
They're like, I'm really sorry that this is happening to you. You know, when they said that, I said they need to be honored for what they did.
Miss Ali, wearing her hijab, said that she was in her old neighborhood out for a walk along busy Foothill Boulevard, and it was noon last Monday. A squad car stopped her and said, we just got a report that you may be breaking into cars. And she said,
okay, let me see my tools, a water bottle and my cell phone. I don't know how I would do that.
And then, a short time after that, a second squad car pulled up to her and said, we have a report that someone matching your description is stealing mail.
Okay, identity theft. If I should put that on my resume.
You can see that she wasn't busy breaking into cars or mailboxes.
We just tried to explain to her why we were out there, why we have to respond.
Officer Ian Vandenberg and Sergeant Yolanda Juarez questioned her, and Miss Ali said they did it with dignity.
Human to human empathy, and that's what they connected with their eyes.
She said in other situations, not with police, but with neighbors or strangers, that hasn't always been the case.
It's like, what did I do? I'm sorry, I'm wearing a hijab.
We're expected to perform professionally and treat every member of this community as if they were a family member.
The chief said he was surprised by today's outpouring, and he said thank you, to which Miss Ali and the rest of the Muslim community said, no, Chief, thank you. I asked the chief in his long career as a police officer, has he had anything like this happen or even heard of it? He said no. Reporting live from Monrovia, I'm Dave Lopez, CBS 2 News.
And only.
Thank you so much. Oh, that's so sweet. We are very honored to have Esma Ali with us. Esma, would you like to tell your story from 2018? Esma, you're muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Now, hi all, can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Good evening, everyone. So happy to see you all. First of all, where's the police chief, Alan Sanvictores? Are you here, Chief Alan?
He is. He's in the room.
Cool.
Hi, Esma.
Hi. I wanted to start off by saying, police chief, I understand that being a police officer nowadays is just not being respected for all the hard work you guys do, especially now. Let us know what we can do to, as a community, to make your department feel more valued and better. You're sticking your necks out for us, and few bad apples here and there should not prejudice people the way they have been prejudiced. against the police.
Thank you so
So
much.
with that, let me just start off a few words about myself. I am an immigrant from India. I was 8 years old when we migrated here. My dad's a civil engineer and his talents were in demand. So here we came, and as you know, prejudice was always there. Prejudice exists in our homeland as well, where I'm from. Whenever there's a majority and you're a minority, you're going to get the heat, and so that is it's not any different. The way I look at it, it's prejudice is part of life. Sometimes it can get real nasty. For example, I don't live in that neighborhood anymore. At the time I was taking a walk, I was a visitor in my old neighborhood. And when I lived in that neighborhood, right off of Foothill and Sunset, when I lived there, the neighbors were extremely mean. In fact, I had knocked on the door and said, I'm having some neighbors over for some tea. Would you like to come? To invite one of my neighbors. And she said, off my property, lady. Ooh, that hurt. I mean, that felt like a stab wound. And then a few other neighbors, you know, whenever I said, I used to walk around all the time. I mean, you gotta stay fit. So walking around all the time, the neighbors would just be real awful and mean. And then I moved to Arcadia, and then sometimes in grocery stores, I would run into those old neighbors and say hi. And just what I would experience is just total ignorance on the other side. But that should not bring you down at all. That I always took it as an opportunity to educate people who are ignorant. You got to stand up. I mean, we have examples. We have Ruby, what's her last name? Bridges, I think, a little girl, only Black girl in town who stood up to an all-white mob. So, I mean, you know, if people like that can do it, then who am I to feel sorry for myself? I think every chance is an opportunity to let people know who you are and that the whole world exists besides their own backyard. A lot of people are not, you know, well cultured, so to speak, and they just think the whole entire world is what they see in front of their eyes. And so this is just an opportunity, the way I look at it. And so on that day, a lot of people stood with me. Some of you are here. Sonia was there, and others of you were there, right there to have my back, and I appreciate that. And then there were others, people in different organizations that I belong to in the community, Rotary clubs, downtown improvement clubs, and this or that. And I asked them, will you stand with me, guys? And it was all, we'll see. But that's okay, you know, nobody can change overnight. And so every chance is an opportunity, and you can't always, you know, hold grudges. So such and such people don't show up from such and such club that I served so hard on. Well, those feelings are always going to be there, but I think we have to rise beyond that. Now, I want to tell you one story real quickly. I went to there was an anti-Muslim rally in Woodland Hills. And then there were people holding flags saying Muslims, beware of Muslims and all of this and stuff, and shouting. And then I was there, of course, on the other side, and so I said, the police were like, lady, don't go there, please, lady, don't go there. And we may not be able to, the police were nervous how they're going to protect me. So then what I did was I dove right into the crowd and I said, hi, guys. They were like, what? Why is she being so nice to us? And I said, well, how you want to just have a chat? Well, and there's just shouting and shouting all of this stuff at me, like, you're a Muslim woman, your husband would he even let you talk to us? I said, well, he does let me out of the dungeon once in a while. And the funny thing was that few people in the crowd automatically caught it that I was kidding. But then I was told that some others really thought I was serious and they were trying to find ways to help me help this poor woman out of the dungeon. So the ignorance, the level of ignorance is incredible. But guess what? I made friends that day. In that crowd, we exchanged some phone numbers, and one lady, one young girl was Bianca, and she even she needed a place to stay, and she had moved in with us. And you know, we let her say, "Come complete your education." She was having trouble with her parents, so then, you know, that's how you make friends. That's how you get to know people. And now I'm not advocating that you let anyone that you meet on the street who's yelling slogans against you to just have them move in with you like I did. I'm a little nuts.
Yes, we noticed Esma. Esma is going to change the world through humor and determination. Thank you for that story, Esma. May I share one too? During 9/11, we were all heartbroken. I'm sure you remember that. Yes. My neighbor at the time were Arab Muslims, and they immediately started flying the American flag. And I must admit, I started watching out to take care of them, because at that same time, people were saying, put the Arabs in camp. Now, as Asian Americans whose family or whose people who understands the history of concentration camps and prison camps within the United States, it just brought chills up and down my spine. And it was a very difficult moment. But younger people, Esma, sorry about that, like Prince Bhojwani has some ideas of where we should go next. So let's hear from Prince Bhojwani, who is the founder of the Alliance of South Asians in North America. I will say that Prince has to get into an airplane by 7 o'clock or start getting in the car to get to the airplane. So he will be limited in his time with us. Thank you, Prince, for taking the time.
Susie and all, thank you so much for giving me this space and creating a panel of such amazing, very experienced people. And really, I want to also thank you for including South Asians in this, broadly Asian American storytelling experience, because I think that's so important. And I'll go into it.
That is absolutely to the credit of Mona Manihar. So you share that thanks to her with her.
Perfect. So I'll give you a brief background and I'll make it as quick as possible. Really about me, I'm a Hindu Pakistani that was born in Inglewood and raised all around LA. Didn't live in Monrovia, but lived in all the neighborhoods right around Monrovia. So, I'm a honorary Monrovian. How about that? So a little bit about me and what I do right now. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Asana Voices. Asana Voices stands for the Alliance of South Asians in North America. And what we do is we've created a platform to educate and engage South Asians in North America on economic, political, and social issues. We realized that there was too much of this gap that existed, and we've done a tremendous job of closing it. And I'll get into that briefly at the end. Something that's really important for all of you to know, at least about me, and I think the rest of my team, is that I am a strong proponent of using introspection as a means for change. I think that's very important. I think as we see now with social media rising and really antagonizing language being the key attention grabber, we need to really step back and realize that introspection and being able to understand that differences in experiences and viewpoints exist, but antagonizing is not the way that we're all going to get together on the table to make that change. And I think Esma Ali was a testament of that, right? With her story of really bridging the gap between people who more or less didn't want anything to do with her. So I'll tell you a little bit about my experience as a Pakistani Hindu born in LA. I would say I would break my experience into obliviousness, hatred, and embracement. So obliviousness, I was born, in Inglewood in '92. And you can imagine tensions there were quite hot, based off of all the, everything that was going on at that time. And, I was born to very young parents and also my uncles, my dad's brothers. I was raised by a very colorful upbringing, had a lot of friends who looked like me and didn't look like me, Black, Asian, Hispanic, you name it. I didn't really know, what Pakistani American meant. I just understood what it meant to be a young American, right? Nothing else really made sense. Fast forward to 9/11. I think that's really key because up until, remember, I'm a Pakistani Hindu. So up until 9/11, it seemed like nobody in America knew what a Muslim was, knew what Islam was about, or, had any idea, if they were given pictures of what a Muslim was or wasn't, right? And that morning, that unfortunate morning when those towers came down crashing, the switch had just flipped. It seemed as everyone in the States had a strong opinion on what a Muslim was and wasn't. And I was only in the 5th grade at that time. And I remember going back home and my parents here on the call, going back home and sharing that I had received my first death threat as a 5th grader. And every day almost since then was some sort of bullying and taunting based off of that. And I hated it, right? I had just made friends. And after that morning, a lot of my friends had kind of alienated me because I was somehow the enemy, or my parents were somehow involved in this grand scheme, which was very tough, And I remember this conversation that I had with my mom. I was probably in middle school by that point, and I said, I'm really tired of this. How can I make friends again? How can I approach people and not be the enemy, or the enemy of the state? And she had said, stop telling people you're Pakistani. Just tell them you're Indian. Tell them you're an Indian Hindu. Tell them you're something else. And they don't really. A lot of people don't associate, Indian Hindus as antagonizers or terrorists. So maybe you can do that. And I did do that. So that's that hatred part. And third is embracement. So embracement came, a few years ago when I realized that my identity, my belief systems, my upbringing was the core root of my personality, was the core root of who I am as an individual. And I, along with so many of my peers, are leaders of our communities in various respects. And it would be a disservice to all of us if I had lied to everyone saying that I am an Indian American, pretty much hiding the truest part of my own identity. And I would say Asana Voices, which we'd founded shortly after the brutal murder of George Floyd, sometime last year, that has led me to embrace who I am as a Pakistani American, as a South Asian American, as an Asian American, but most importantly, as an American. And I'm going to segue now into kind of what Asana Voices is doing very briefly, so you can get an idea of, all the uphill battles we're dealing with, even within the South Asian community. We've launched this campaign called the Save Our Hearts campaign. And the reason we did that is because we found out, when I say we, it's my team, we found out that this bill introduced by US Representative Pramila Jayapal was called the South Asian Heart Health Awareness and Research Act, to really illuminate and shed a spotlight onto the fact that half of all deaths around the world that are related to heart health are accounted for by South Asians. But South Asians are not half of the population of the world, right? We're 2 billion out of 7+ billion in the world. And the fact that this had failed in 3 separate sessions of US Congress was alarming, right? Because South Asians are one of the most affluent. They donate a lot to political campaigns. But when it comes out to our health and public health, there's nothing to be said or done. So that was quite alarming. And for Asana Voices, we'd already built out the infrastructure to kind of drive this change. We said, hey, you know what? I think it's time to use this platform to incite change for our own community and show our community that we absolutely do belong in this space. So Save Our Hearts is really, it's doing two things. One, it's raising awareness and educating members of our community about our own heart health. But number two is telling them that, hey, you better go talk to your Congress, member, right, representative, senator, whoever, and let them know that your vote matters. And you're going to remember next time, when you're at the polls. And that's definitely picking up steam. And we've got, I can't really disclose much, but I will say one of the highest levels of US government is now in contact with us to really expand this movement. The last thing I want to bring about, and this is very, very, very important, is that currently 1 out of 6 Asian Americans, including South Asians, don't count South Asians as Asian Americans. And I think that's very key to understand, because, when I saw the recent wave of, these brutal AAPI, violence against AAPI, I had applauded the fact that members of the community had finally stood up and, kind of shed some spotlight. But I also took a step back and I said, we need to unify our voices. We need to realize that East Asians and South Asian and Central Asians are all ultimately Asians. And although we're not a monolith, we share so much in common and our struggles are so similar that we should absolutely work together, unify our voices, stand behind one message and push that at the forefront. It's not an us or them, it's a we. And as long as we approach the conversations as a we, I think we're going to make a pretty strong impact. And that's really it. I mean, that's really all I have to say, Susie.
Prince, you said so much. So let me review. ASANA stands for the Alliance of South Asians in North America. South Asians are from India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, maybe Nepal and Sri Lanka, and they really have spread around the world. There's a lot in Europe, in England, especially in Canada, in the East Coast, and in Africa, as well as in Fiji and Guyana. So it's like you said, it's a multi-ethnic group, and very something we need to learn more about. They're also multi-religious, as you pointed out in your experience, and they eat good food, don't they? So that's always
they do.
That's always a positive situation. Thanks so much. And I know you need to run. Stay as long as you can. And while I segue to our bestest speaker, no offense, Prince, but another ethnic group that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle of Asians are Filipinos. And we are so fortunate to have, I am so fortunate to have a mentor right here in Monrovia in the form of Chief Alan Sanvictores. Chief Sanvictores is a typical Filipino American, but also not a typical Filipino American. He has his own story, and he also has the story of being the chief of Monrovia Police Department. So, Chief, share some of your, your ideas and thinking in this difficult year that we've had.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank you so much to everybody, and especially you, Susie, for inviting me here to this very educational meeting and much needed meeting during this time. So I very much appreciate it. As Susie introduced me, my name is Alan Sanvictores. For those of you that have never met me before, I'm currently the chief of police for the city of Monrovia. I've been here working for the Monrovia Police Department my whole career. I started in 1995. If I back up just a little bit, how my experiences here, and that which led me to this point. My parents, I've first generation American. My parents are both from the Philippines. My father enlisted.
I'm sorry, Chief, time out. I find that a little bit difficult because I am an immigrant. I consider myself first generation American. I actually made the decision to become an American. It was a conscious choice. You, yes, my child, is considered second generation American.
Please forgive me, and thank you. And this is what I love is we've learned so much. Just you and I, Susie, we've been trading, the Tagalog language back so much. We're learning so much from each other. So my father was born in on the island of Luzon in northern Philippines, and enlisted in the United States Coast Guard when the U.S. military could still recruit in the Philippines. He enlisted in the Coast Guard, the U.S. Coast Guard, to come here to the United States. He came from a very poor town where he was from, and that's how he came over. My mother was from the southern island of Mindanao in the Philippines, where she ended up going to nursing school, like, go figure, right? And she ended up immigrating to the United States through Canada to become a nurse here in the United States to obviously get a better foothold on where she wanted her life to go. My parents met in New York City. Typical sailor and nurses getting together at a party, right? They ended up getting married. They had a kid. They had me, and then my sister in Newark, New Jersey. So I grew up a good portion of my earlier childhood in Newark, New Jersey. I lost the accent a long time ago. And then we were moved to the West Coast when we had a change of duty stations, and came here to the West Coast in my later years in elementary school. Now, growing up, through like we've heard so many similar stories this evening. Growing up as a Filipino here in the United States, even though I'm from New Jersey of all places. But it's amazing that, the questions that I got growing up as a kid, I got made fun of like a lot of kids do, but, they did that and always asked me, where are you from? What language do you use? And I'm like, dude, I'm from New Jersey, I'm from Newark. And I get asked all these questions, and I still get asked that to this day. So, that was very interesting, but I had friends. I grew up in a very ethnically diverse neighborhood, both in Newark and also here, which was wonderful. And then I, attended high school, ended up joining the Army. My father always said, hey, we're here in the United States. We have a good life now. I'm serving in the service. You will too. You will always give back by doing that. So it was natural for me to join the military. I didn't join the Coast Guard. I get seasick, so I joined the Army, and ended up joining the Army. And it was there that I truly, and I'm not trying to sound like a recruiting poster or a recruiting commercial, but it was there that, I was put in my first platoon. We had every ethnicity you could think of from across the world. We had, Koreans, Caucasians from Alabama, African Americans from New York. And the thing is, in the military, it was bred out of us. Basically, I don't care where you're from. You're all green. You're all Army green, and it was that kind of world as I grew up in my younger adulthood that I loved. We were what the world should be in our one little microcosm of society right there. And coming out of the Army, going back into college, and then going back into the Army as an officer, I've been able to take those experiences with me. Have there been challenges along the way? Absolutely. There was always, you'd always come across, some level of ignorance, looking at me like, who are you, Lieutenant Sanvictores, I'm in the Army. And, how long have you been here in the United States? I'm like, no, man, let me explain to you how that worked. And it's just a matter of education, like we've heard from so many other speakers today, being able to educate people on who we are as people. Can we be taken for what our actions are, who we are, not as so much of, where they think we're from. We've got that. I was constantly being posed with, questions of ethnic legitimacy. Oh, you're not really Filipino either. I've gotten a lot of that too from other people from my own cousins. They're like, you're not a real Filipino, and I'm like, give me a break. I'm like, come on. But what was interesting is, all of that service, but all that education, and as I transitioned into law enforcement, and I loved coming to Monrovia. The Monrovia Police Department, the city of Monrovia. I've always been treated for who I was, who I am, not where they think I'm from or anything like that. I was never given that, model ethnicity of what they think I should be. But what I'm finding out these days, especially with what's going on in the use of social media and things of that nature, is now's the most important time of all where education really needs to come into play. Education and open-mindedness. This uptick in hate, in hate crimes and assaults on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, it's disgusting. Hate crimes in general. I just, I'm a cop. It's across the board. I can't stand it. And it's only through this type of forum and the forums, those individual relationships that we make out in society today, where we get to learn about each other, get to know about each other. I've developed a deep respect for the Muslim community. I got to know Esma. I've become very good friends with the imam of a local masjid. We've been friends over the last 8 years, and just self-education. So what I know I've tried to do is, as I go out through my life, whether it's I'm on duty at work or whether I'm off duty at home with my family, it's a constant education to try and open people up, like you did, Esma. You jumped right in there, and you got them to know you, and that's what I strive to do. My daughter, I have my children are biracial, and my youngest daughter, who's 17, she kept, she was approached constantly at school, and it bothered her at times, like, well, what are you? That old question, where are you from? Where are you originally from? That kind of stuff. And so she started a multicultural club, which she's a president now, and is one of the largest clubs at her high school, all based around education, inclusion, get people to know you and learn other cultures. So we truly have this understanding. And in a way, it's that same understanding and education that I personally learned in my first platoon in the Army, where we were all forced to know each other, where the drill sergeants would be all over us. But we became, tight as ticks, and it was beautiful. And is that something that I constantly strive to? Is it absolutely hard? Yes. What we're seeing today, the crime, it's disgusting. And I'll do every effort if anything like that is reported to my police department. We're going to take every effort to investigate and prosecute and bring people to justice, and also bring education, because it's only the safety for everybody in Monrovia, as well as the community, that we can truly move forward as a people. So, sorry if I was rambling.
No, I think your message came very nicely through. Thank you so much, Chief Sanvictores, and all our panelists. It is now time for us to open it up to questions. Now, I'm warning you, if you don't come up with a discussion and questions, we're going to have to go to the business part of the ChangeMakers meeting. And who wants to do that, right? I'm joking, Lois. Don't pull me off just yet. So is the chat room open, Christian? Or perhaps people can now unmute themselves and we can go into a gallery view. I think we're friends here.
I have a question.
Aha, here comes our ChangeMakers person, Mona. Go ahead.
So in the audience right now, we have Maritza from Monrovia Unified School District Board. The more we talk about this, the more it is clear, it has always been clear, that the best way to reduce hatred, the best way to reduce violence is to know each other, is to actually know who the other person is who doesn't look like you. How do we go about doing that from elementary school level? Because that's where the conditioning needs to start, that everybody is different, and it's okay if people are different, looks-wise, talks-wise, food-wise. How do we, incorporate a solution in the Monrovia Unified School District, and then hopefully we become the model community, model city to make it happen all over US?
Your question was for Maritza Travanti?
Yeah, I want to know how, we can get involved.
Hi, Mona.
Maritza, before you speak, let me first of all, Mona, I want to introduce to all of you our newest ChangeMakers member, and that's Maritza Travanti, who is the president of the Monrovia School Board. And yes, we are really, really pleased to have her. As a matter of fact, I'm pleased that all of you are here. But I want you to know that that her presence here today is an indication of how important your messages are. Our message, our mission is to this community. We tell some stories that sometimes are painful to listen to. They were painful to experience, but I can assure you that most of us, all of us who have lived that experience in Monrovia, Monrovia is still our town of choice. And so the beautiful thing about it is you're helping us bring the community together to learn from each other and to explore solutions so that the next generation and the generation after it will not have to go through what we, our parents, our grandparents, our parents, and we have gone through. So Maritza, let me say welcome. You can fill out the application later, but we're so proud to have you here. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Louis, and hello, everybody. I'm really happy to be here. Mona, to go back to your question, I mean, that's a really good and important question for us to ask ourselves every single day. It starts at home in accepting everybody as, and I'm sorry if you can hear my dogs. It starts at home, but it needs to continue into the classrooms. And we do, you know, recognize the various months through different activities. It's been a little more challenging this past year, but teachers have done a great job and still having the conversations, reading the books, and homework assignments surrounding the various months that we're recognizing. The board adopted a resolution for anti-racism this last year, and every month we're doing different things to try to, you know, push that narrative forward so that our children are growing up in a different environment than we all grew up in, and that our parents all grew up in, and so forth and so forth. I'm a first generation Mexican. My parents were both born in Mexico. I have witnessed, my parents have witnessed, my grandparents have witnessed things that I wish they hadn't. And just like we've heard tonight, I wish that you all didn't go through what you had to go through. But if we can teach our children at a young age, then we're going to be in a better place. Really are.
This is Grace Yoshimoto. I just want to mention that, you know, the California State Education Board recently, after a very long debate, accepted a model curriculum for ethnic studies. Mm-hmm. And LAUSD has integrated it into a graduation requirement at the high school level.
Wow.
Fresno,
cool.
Did a year-long curriculum. I think one of the interesting questions would be if Monrovia Unified School District would also integrate it as part of their graduation requirement.
So yeah, that's being looked at already. These were pilot programs in the districts that you identified. Mm-hmm. Sacramento is going to push that curriculum down, and we will absolutely be adopting it as a graduation requirement.
Good.
Great.
Yeah, the state, when they make it a requirement, also they cover the cost of the textbooks and the software, whatever's related to that curriculum, and we're assured that that's coming down the pike.
Good. It needs to be.
I want to make sure that we all understand how we are so very much connected. Alan and my children grew up together in the neighborhood here in Duarte because I couldn't buy a home north of Foothill, and so my family moved here. And when we moved here, some of our neighbors moved out. I know Alan probably remembers some of those, but that's how he and I first met, going back to 1969. In the 1980s, when I retired and came home to give back to my community and my church, one of the people who helped me do that was Grace Yoshimoto, because Grace was a counselor at Monrovia High School, where I had attended way back in the 50s. But guess what? She and I formed a bond along with Tracy Golar of helping to train children to prepare them for the SAT prep, because there was an imbalance there with students of color. Fast forward the camera, and Maritza and I met maybe 4 years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and we've also formed a bond. And what I guess I'm saying to you is all of us are connected in some way. Oka and my favorite family on Fig Street, the Parkers, I was just amazed that Oka knew more Black people in Monrovia than I did. And it's
Cadbury's.
still today. So the point that I guess I'm saying to you is we are all connected, and I need to turn this mic back over to you, but I want you to understand that the dream for ChangeMakers is that we would have this conversation tonight, not because of the violence, that part we hope to avoid, but the mere fact that you're willing to come and reconnect together in this community at the proper time, and the people who are helping to make it possible as the next generation, Christian and Christine and Caroline, products of Monrovia School District, who are helping us technology-wise help to make this story told and preserved it's going to be preserved for all generations to watch. So I'm going to give it back to you for more questions, but don't beat up on Maritza, because she's my buddy, and I promised Catherine Saroshian we take good care of her. Okay.
You have to unmute to ask a question, but please do.
Okay, can I ask?
Oh, okay.
Can I make a comment, Susie?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
And then Betty Tom.
Yeah. Okay, is Marvin gonna go first? Oh, okay.
You go ahead and speak.
Okay, thank you. Betty Thomas, Betty Fisher Thomas, for all those who know me. And then I'm born and raised in Monrovia, but we have a wonderful organization here in Monrovia, and I cannot wait. I'm going to include the Parkers, John, but we're having the MAP program, Monrovia Area Partnership. We're having block parties and gatherings here in Monrovia before COVID. I'm on FIT, so I am anxious. I've already told Matt that it's in City Hall, Dylan, that as soon as I can, I'm going to organize a block party for FIG. I'm going to include Los Angeles and Central, because there's been a change even in this last year. Lois is aware of it, on Fig Street and in Los Angeles and Central. So that's my contribution. As soon as the city gives me the okay, we're having a block party, and I'll be knocking on John Wilmer's door and a few other people too.
Block party, that sounds like a great plan.
Yeah.
As long as there's music.
Monrovia Area Partnership. Monrovia is unique with that.
We used to have them all the time.
Yeah, great.
That concept is very important that you talk about. And the reason I say that, I've talked to my African-American friends that are, some of them that are no longer in the community either, but we keep in contact. The one I'm talking about is the Gadberry family, George Gadberry, or Butch, okay, is in Washington. And he said, we can't, whenever someone tries to legislate people getting together, it doesn't work. What worked with our community growing up is that when you hang with friends and you have get-togethers, whether it was for whatever occasion. I remember I was always at the Gadberries or the Carr family for Monrovia Day, which was May, I think 15th or May 17th, something like that. And then they would come over my house for Japanese New Year's. And then I would be over at my Mexican friend's house for Christmas, they would always serve us tamales. And so then the other thing is that the cultural intermixing started with food originally. Man, Mr. Gadbury would put slabs of ribs on the queue, and we would just scarf, have great time eating at all the different families' homes. So that can start in elementary school as opposed to having the class, which I am all in favor of at the high school level. But if there can be cultural events, I remember my mom going into elementary school, I believe once, to explain what Japanese food was to one of my classes, I recall. It was either then or it was in intermediate school or high school. I can't remember which one, but she went in and talked to the teacher about Japanese cuisine. But if that can start on a regular basis, multiculturally in the elementary school level, I think that would be a great way to start.
I agree. They need to start early nowadays.
Yeah.
Well, any more questions or comments? Actually, I learned something else from Councilman Spicer, and I'm all for food. I'm all for music. But I think we also, as a Monrovia community, have to be more systematic about this, in that one of the things I think that's very important is hiring. When you are represented in city council, when you are represented in the police department, when you see your face on television, it gives a good feeling. It feels like, well, I can do that too. I remember when the woman became what do you call that? An astronaut. When Dr. Sally Ride became an astronaut, yeah. I thought to myself, gee, I didn't know you could do that. And what's next? So I think that systematically we also have to represent, be it with holidays like Ramadan in our city, or other ideas. We really have to open up a little bit more. Are there any more comments, or should we turn it over to the ChangeMakers?
I want to make one comment to Grace, that was the counselor at Monrovia High School, and her upbringing as being, it sounds like she was not quite, is she a Sansei or a Nisei?
Sansei.
Okay, well, what she talks about, what we were told to do, keep our head down. I think our parents were trying to protect us from the discrimination that they had experienced. And a key point was they didn't want us to ever have our loyalty questioned. So we were, not told about what they experienced. And I think that was, initially it was good for us, but it was not till my freshman year in college that I found out what actually happened during World War II. I don't know if you can still hear me, but I don't see Lois or Susie at all anymore.
Well, Oka, I see you and I hear you loud and clear.
Okay.
I am so thrilled that we've had this conversation. I referred to, when we opened the meeting, I referred to the acceptance speech that Tyler Perry made at the Oscars, and he talked about coming in the middle. No matter what's going on outside, let's come in the middle. And I applaud all of you for coming on. We can't do the job that ChangeMakers has set out to do without the cooperation of everyone. Esma, I'm so glad to have had a chance to meet you. Prince, who's flying, and I pray that he lands safely back here in the States. We're happy to have you. Of course, Oka, I've chased you and I finally got you to start answering my calls. I love it. I love it. This is great. And of course, Grace, every opportunity that we get together, get to be together, we are. I am very much ingratiated to Monahar, who opened the door to the world for us. And I hope you saw the map that shows how big the Asian geography happens to be. And I hope we are more inclusive as we move from this meeting to the next meeting. I would hope we would think of this as part one. Susie Ling has opened up the door. As a matter of fact, Susie is the reason, she doesn't know this, but Susie is the reason that ChangeMakers was actually founded. She told stories at the Historical Museum that Betty Stafford and I heard, and we wanted to tell more of the stories because there were so many stories that could be told. Whenever I tell the story about discrimination or bigotry that occurred in Monrovia, please be sure you know that all of us who have experienced it or heard about it, Monrovia is still our place of choice because Monrovia is one town that's not afraid to have the conversation. It's not afraid to do something about it. Monrovia is a place that if you can see it, you can be it. And obviously that is true from the persons who are in government now, the persons who are elected now. I ask you to take a picture of Monrovia today. Does it look like the picture when Monrovia was named the All-American City? Does it look like the town? Did it improve? We always have to keep measuring to make sure that things are still getting better. And one of the ways we can be sure of that is, of course, by coming together, talking, sharing ideas. I can hardly wait for the block party with the food and everybody getting together to make sure that we share our lives and our stories and our solutions for making this place a better place to live. Susie, is there anyone else that has a comment? If not, we have enough time to have our annual meeting.
Hello out there.
Hi, Ralph.
Hello, everyone. I just have a short statement to make, and it was a beautiful meeting, and it was so important that as African American person that I realized that we're not alone in our struggle. Our struggle is a struggle of one, and that's the struggle of equality for everyone.
Yes.
Which is really tremendous. So I want to commend Susie, the speakers, Lois Gaston for a tremendous job, and the young people that's been keeping it real, because if they didn't have the energy and the activity to take on this technological giant that we deal with, known as mass media, where would we be at? You know? So beautiful job. I thank everyone that was speaking and encouraging folks to get involved. And I really have to give a special shout out to Betty Thomas for what she created that happens in the month of February, where she invites people to come in and to read to the students in lower grades. And that is so vital to catch them early, makes them better in the long run.
Yeah.
So that's it. Thank you so much.
Princess.
Keep up the good work and keep us united.
Thank you very much. All of you ChangeMakers members and all of you panelists are invited wherever you live to be a part of the organization. It's the one organization where there are no dues, but I will make sure that you have that opportunity. I'm going to take the opportunity now, Susie, if you don't mind, to again say thank you to all the panelists. You're welcome to stay. Our business meeting is going to go really, really quick, but we would like very much to acknowledge the ChangeMakers annual meeting is now in session. We just have a short agenda. Would you please welcome Angelica Chavez? Don't leave, Marvin. You're a member. We need your vote. Okay. And Angelica, would you give us our secretary's report quickly?
Yes. Hi, this is Angelica Chavez. I'm acting secretary for Monrovia ChangeMakers. The minutes for the January and March 2021 all members meetings are on file. Copies are available if requested. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve Baker is our treasurer. Steve, would you give us our financial report?
Thank you, Lois. Could we screen share?
Yes.
And there it is. Thank you. So I'm pleased to present our financial report. Our income figure you can see is $6,300. Our expenses through May 13th, $958.91. Our cash balance on hand presently is $5785.07. So we have a healthy treasury to further our work in the community and abroad. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Steve has applied for our 501(c)(3) status, and we're waiting for the federal government to give us our tax ID. Hopefully that'll be coming soon in spite of the pandemic. Robert, the meeting's now yours.
All right. Excuse me 1 minute, please.
Robert, we just lost your sound. I'm going to ask for a motion to accept the treasurer's report, please.
I move to accept the report.
Is there a second?
I second.
Who is I?
Cheryl Baines.
Thank you very much.
Gadberry.
Thank you very much. Having heard a motion and a second, are there any objections? If not, so moved. Robert?
I'd apologize. I had to leave real quick.
That's okay. Christian, would you screen share for Robert's presentation?
Okay, we have a, are we ready?
Yes.
We have a slate of electors for this next year, and the ChangeMakers members to select as you see on the election ballot.
I think, Robert, I believe we need to ask our members if there are any other nominations from the floor.
Are there any other nominations from the floor?
No.
No.
Then Robert, you can ask for a motion then regarding the ballot.
I have a motion that the is approved as noted.
I second it. Oh.
I move to approve the election slate.
Thank you, Jason. Thank you, Olka, for your second. Robert, you can carry it, please. Robert, technically, I can't carry it since I'm on the ballot. Would you carry the motion?
Okay, well, Lois, I'm sorry. I'm not sure where you, I don't have it in front of me here, so
It's on the screen. It's showing on the screen.
what would you like me to do?
You need to carry the motion. There's a motion on the floor to accept the ballot.
I carry a motion to accept the ballot.
Are there any objections?
No.
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 Okay, those are all right. Then Robert, you can say that the motion carries.
Motion carries.
Good, thank you very much. Christian, if you would give me back the screen, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, ChangeMakers members. It's the most unusual annual meeting, but guess what? We've got it in. In January, we postponed our meeting so that we could bring you a program regarding COVID. We had 5 scientists on to help us to better understand the pandemic and how we could protect ourselves. In the month of March, we had a memorial tribute to our founding member, Betty Sanford, and I appreciate everything that everyone did for that. In that encounter, we actually met I-teens, Christian Figueroa and Carolyn Squires, and they have agreed to become our technical support specialists. We are so grateful for that. Let me say to you that we will continue to have our all members meetings every other month. And in the month of July, on July 21st, I invite you to look for and recruit, ask any person who was a part of the Monrovia Youth Baseball League back in the 60s, 70s, 80s. During that time, our children and their coaches and our police department and our business owners, our parents, it was the only totally integrated, racially integrated group in the city of Monrovia. Our children went to segregated schools in elementary. We lived in segregated neighborhoods, but our children played in the Monrovia Youth Baseball League, and the police department was an integral part of that. So in July, we will have a reunion. Watch for our flyer, tell everybody about it. And if you played on a Monrovia team, either at Wayland Way or at the park, wherever, in any league, Pee Wee, Little League, Pony, or whatever. But I don't remember all the leagues, but if you worked a snack bar, if you were a parent, if you were a coach, if you were a sponsor, we want to come back together and start the tradition of telling the story of how we were together. Our children were together, and I would imagine that our children will be the ones who will get us out of this divide. So with that, I have no other business to share with you except my gracious appreciation to Jason for hosting us tonight, to I-teens for being our technical support, Mona for helping us put it together, to Susie Ling, our facilitator, and of course to all of our panelists who did just a marvelous job of sharing their lives, their stories, and their parent stories with us. I appreciate all of you for what we're doing. Chief, I can't believe that you're this kid that grew up down the street, and now you have the safety of me and my families and all my friends in your hands. I am grateful to all of you. Please know that we'll look forward to seeing you again, joining with us, and there will be a part 2, I am certain, that we will undertake. Mona's shaking her head, and she'll help us do the planning. Susie, thank you very much for facilitating an excellent program. With that, I say good night, and this is recorded and will be on our on YouTube or on our website. Thank you very much.